Can everyone hear me okay? All right, so this is exciting for me because I get to test a whole bunch of new stuff on all of you. So if I seem surprised when I see a slide, it's because it's probably only the second time that I've seen it. So rarely do I get to talk to a group of people that are actually technical. But I am going to warn you, right? This is not going to be an incredibly deep technical keynote. During the fireside chat, we can get a little bit deeper. If you want to corner me and ask me questions, I do build robotics and AI. Love talking about it. But the main purpose of this keynote is to get you to see patterns. Like to start to understand that even if you know a lot about your particular technology, there's 5 or other technologies that seem totally unrelated that are going to begin colliding together to accelerate everything at an exponential rate. Now, I used to take this slide out, but because of the Metaverse and the new Matrix movie, I put it back in. So some of you might remember this. This is when Neo was given the choice to take the red or the blue pill. That is what I'm going to do today, right? Because some of this presentation, well, you may be familiar with some of the technology. The conclusion I'm going to come to at the end, and the case I'm going to make is going to make you make this decision, right? It's either going to make you rethink the way you view your future, your job, your community, and our nation, or you can just totally think I'm full of crap and put your head in the sand and ignore me completely. I've had both, right? So I am not going to take offense. But I am excited because we're going to get to talk a little bit more on a fireside chat afterwards. So I'm going to dive right in. But before I start talking about AI, robots, a lot of the amazing advancements, as far as I'm concerned, the reason things have been speeding up and they're never going to slow down is this. If you know what it is, shout it out. Napster. All right, so we're going to get in a time machine and go back to 1999. To put it into context, the one rule about Fight Club was you don't talk about Fight Club. The terrible band Smash Mouth was topping the charts, and I was a junior in college. Now, when I was in college, I had 2 jobs. One would be one of the worst jobs I ever had, and one would be one of the best jobs I ever had. The first job I had was at something called the Great Steak and Potato. And I don't think we have them here, but it's a pretty self-explanatory name. It was in the food court. It was just steak and just potatoes, right? Now, as a college kid and an Irish guy, I'm a McElligott, I never thought I would get sick of steak and potatoes. Little did I know, though, I was the only person working this little booth in the food court. I had to take orders, I had to work the grill, I had to clean the grill. I got chased by dogs going home because I smelled like meat all the time. It was a terrible, terrible job. Right? But I stuck it out. And I stuck it out for one reason. Because at 1 o'clock, when the lunch rush was over, I got to throw my apron in the garbage, and I would walk 60 seconds around a corner to what would be one of the greatest jobs I ever had. I worked at what was called a record town. And it was one of the last record stores before they all started closing down. And it was everything you could think of working in a record store. It was awesome. I got to bring my guitar to work. I goofed off with all my friends. But one of the coolest things was, one day a month, I got to be the superhero in my dorm. Now, at the time, there was only a couple different ways to discover new music. One was like through the radio, right? The other was like on MTV and music videos. And the other one was, some of you may be old enough to remember, there were these CD towers that were in all these record stores and CD stores. And my job was to fill these up with all the new music that would come from the labels, and they were called CD samplers. So we would get all the new music before everyone else. And my job was to fill these towers up and basically encourage people to buy all these new albums. Now, what our bosses didn't know is on that first Monday every month that we would get it, we would bring in a shoebox full of blank CDs, and me and all my coworkers would start making copies. And then we would trade them for stuff back at the dorm. And so, like, we had this whole ecosystem going on of where we were getting tons of free stuff in exchange for just these burned CDs. And it was great until one night, and I remember this vividly, I was walking back into my dorm, and my friend Fred Duff was blaring the new Third Eye Blind single from his room. And I was like, how the hell did he get this? Like, I just got it right now. So I pounded on the door, and I demanded to know where I got this. And he goes, oh, I got it from Napster. I'm like, what's a Napster? And so he pulls up this website, and he goes, oh yeah, it's this website where we're all sharing music. And I'm looking at it, and he's like, yeah, you can download music, and what you download, you can upload, and other people can share. And I'm like, wait a minute, so you're stealing music? Because I've become an expert at this point. I was like, there's no way you're convincing me that you're sharing, get out of here. But the more I started to think about it, I was like, I've got all these boxes. Maybe I should start doing this. And so I started putting stuff on Napster, and so did all of my friends. And before we knew it, everybody was sharing music. Now, this is probably coming up on, I don't know, maybe 20, 21 years ago at this point. Some of you might know the drummer from Metallica, Lars Ulrich. Right? Like that dude went on TV and he went before Congress. And this is what he had to say about Napster. He said, Napster and file sharing services like Napster are going to be the death knell of the music industry. They take money out of hardworking artists' pocket and they devalue everything. It's going to be the beginning of the end. Now, in response to this, me and all my friends were watching this, and we said, give me a break, you whiny, rich, rock star baby. You gotta be kidding me. Like Metallica at the time was charging $150 for a ticket. So it actually just made us more and more angry. And so we started to download more and more music. Now, I am not advocating piracy. I'm just giving you a historical lesson. It's been a long time. I'm pretty sure I cannot go to jail for this anymore. But there was something serious happening here, because that got us to do it more and more. What happened next? Internet speeds got faster. Hard drives dropped in price. Pretty soon it wasn't just movies, it was video games. And I mean, all sorts of different media, right? Endless. Now keep this in your head, because I'm gonna talk about a whole bunch of crazy stuff. But if you really wanna know why things have been speeding up, and they're never gonna slow down, I'm gonna come back to this later. But until I get to where we are right now, let's figure out how we got here. Right, so this, according to Reader's Digest, in 1966, was supposed to be the world in 1999. Right, we're supposed to be all flying around in jetpacks, living underwater, robot butlers, all this other stuff. Or another way to look at it is the world of Back to the Future. Right, some of you, if you've seen Back to the Future, it's got the flying cars and the hoverboards and holographic technology. And honestly, thanks to things like the HoloLens and Magic Leap, I mean, our augmented reality and virtual reality technology is way surpassing this. And just last week, these two startups just got funded, one by Delta. So we're gonna start having autonomous flying taxis very, very soon. And I don't know if some of you saw this during the pandemic, this is Gravity Industries. This is the British Royal Marines testing jetpacks for combat missions. 3D printed parts. I mean, this stuff is pretty incredible. If you want to go on their Instagram, they have all sorts of crazy stuff that they're doing. And we do have hoverboards, right? I mean, they don't really fly, they just explode and set your pants on fire. But I mean, we've got them, right? So the future's here. I mean, if you don't believe me, here's Mike Tyson riding a hoverboard.
I broke my back.
But all joking aside, right? So the reason I'm showing you some of this stuff is because for a long time, right? In the 50s, like the World's Fair and again, robot butlers and computers and flying cars and all this other stuff, right? Human beings tend to be very, very good at thinking linear, right? So when all this stuff started to happen back in the 50s, especially after World War II, because we had all this technological power, people expected, okay, we're seeing a robot. So I should have a robot butler in 5 years. 5 years comes, no robot butler. Okay, maybe 10 years. 10 years comes, no robot butler. Pretty soon, robot butlers, science fiction. So all of this stuff that we thought was science that didn't meet the speed of our expectation went very quickly from the science bucket to the science fiction bucket. Now, technology, though, is growing exponentially. It's not growing in a linear fashion, right? And so this is very, very deceptive, but human beings have an incredibly hard time seeing things exponentially. Like linear served us really well, right? You're out in a field, you see a deer, you want to get your lunch, you pull down, pull your bow back, release the arrow, take the deer down. You don't expect the deer to speed up and fly off into space, right? Like that doesn't happen. But in technology, it does. Now, I'm gonna borrow a story about the invention of chess. Like I'm borrowing this from Ray Kurzweil, who's a kind of a kooky, very smart dude, works for Google. And this is really the story of how someone who is the smartest person, the most powerful person, can get it so wrong. So thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, there was this emperor. And this emperor loved games, but had mastered every game that there was. So he sent out a decree in the whole empire, and he said, whoever can come with a game that I can't beat them out right away will have anything they want. So people came from all over the empire, and they fashioned all kinds of different games, but the emperor beat every single person. Until one day a peasant showed up, and he fashioned a chessboard and chess pieces, and he taught the emperor how to play. Game after game, the emperor was defeated by the peasant. But instead of being furious, he was delighted. I mean, this was everything that he wanted. So he told the emperor, you'll have anything your heart desires, name it. And he says, I have a very humble request. All I want is on the first square of the chessboard, 1 grain of rice. And then 4, and then 16, and so on and so forth, growing exponentially. The emperor looked at the grain of rice, and looked at the chessboard, and looked at the grain of rice, and said, granted. Seems like an incredibly humble request. But very quickly, the emperor realized he'd been duped. Because by the time it was done with just the first row of the chessboard, this is how many grains of rice he would have had to give the peasant. And very quickly, it was more than all the grains of rice in the whole world. Now the story goes, the emperor was furious, cut off the head of the peasant, put it on a stick, and in front of the kingdom, and nobody ever brought games again. Right? But this is a real scenario. I used to have an office in DC, and I can promise you, all lawmakers and the people that are doing regulations have absolute no clue on anything to do with technology. And they sure as heck don't understand how fast that it's moving. We're about to enter the second half of the chessboard. Right? It's not just technology. There's a lot of things that have been happening during the fireside chat. We're going to get in a little bit deeper, how the pandemic's changed things, how social media has changed things. But make no mistake, things are speeding up, and they're speeding up at a rate that none of us are prepared for. We're entering what experts are calling the second machine age, or earlier you heard the fourth industrial revolution. You'll hear all these different kinds of terms. But the important thing to understand is none of us really realize how much the first industrial revolution changed humanity. Up until that point, it was pretty much the same for a very, very long time. Then the steam engine comes along, and everything drastically changed, right? Over the last 3 industrial revolutions, there's been a lot of change, but our society really hasn't changed as much as the pace of technology has. But that's about to move very, very quickly. Thanks to a lot of exploding technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics. We're going to talk a little bit about the Metaverse today, which is going to sound silly, but there are some very real-world applications that are going to accelerate things. So first we'll start with artificial intelligence. So I talked about the game of chess. Who here has seen this before? Okay, so good. So a few of you know that this is the game of Go, right? So back in the 90s, IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, the world champion, and it was seen as this big jump forward in artificial intelligence. But the reality was really kind of a big jump forward in supercomputing, right? Like every time you do your one move, there's only so many moves that can happen after. Well, that's very different than the game of Go. See, the game of Go has so many potential outcomes that if you were to take the number of all of the atoms in the universe and add a trillion to that number, you still wouldn't have the potential outcomes of a game of Go. Right? So this was seen as, it was really intuition. Like nobody really knew what made a good Go player. So this was supposed to be something that was maybe 40 years off, that an artificial intelligence could beat a professional player. Well, about 5 or 6 years ago, AlphaGo, created by now a Google Alphabet subsidiary, DeepMind, created AlphaGo. Now AlphaGo was very, very unique because AlphaGo was not programmed to play the game of Go. It was programmed to learn. And then it watched thousands of games on YouTube on how to play the game of Go. And it went on to beat the previous world champion. Now, the reigning world champion at the time thought this was a joke and was like, there's no way, that guy's a has-been, there's no way it's gonna be able to beat me. And so, with the learnings from that match, DeepMind created something called AlphaGo Master. This time, though it didn't watch games on YouTube, it learned from AlphaGo, and it went on to beat the world champion. Right? But that wasn't enough, because they realized, okay, we're still in the loop. How do we get ourselves out of that loop? So what they did was they set themselves a challenge and said, could we create another version of AlphaGo, but this time not be involved at all? And so what they did was they allowed AlphaGo and AlphaGo Master to essentially create a baby. So that code created new code, and this is what it looked like. You can see just within the first couple days, AlphaGo 0, after 3 days, began to move very, very quickly and got better and better and better until it surpassed the first AlphaGo. After about 21 days, it surpassed AlphaGo Master and continued to self-improve. Now, they stopped after this because they were just trying to prove a point. They were just trying to prove that they could create an AI that could learn a skill set and self-improve. So why is this important? Because they begun productizing this. You can see here, DeepMind, this was back in March. Their AI coding engine is good about the average human programmer. So about 50% of the programmers are about as good as AlphaGo code. Right? That was about 6 months ago. There is a massive gap in computer programming. There's a lot of people trying to solve it with training. There's a lot of big companies trying to solve it with artificial intelligence. You can see here, DeepMind's Alpha Tensor. This is more around the augmentation. So they're taking human capabilities and augmenting with artificial intelligence, which is actually the way I think we should be doing it. And you can see here, DeepMind's AI breakthrough allows predictions of more than 200 million protein structures. What that shows is what it would take a research team hundreds of years, and AI can do in days. Right? That's why some of this stuff that I'm about to show you that seems very, very far off, you've got to get it out of your head that you are limited by how many people and resources you have. Because that is not the world we live in, and the pandemic just accelerated it. as well as social media, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Now, this is one of the most exciting and probably influential things that are beginning to happen right now. This is natural language processing and deepfakes. So if you're familiar with natural language processing, I won't go too deep into it, but it essentially allows you not to have to code to tell an AI something. You're able to use the same way that we talk, and artificial intelligence will understand it. So you're seeing a massive explosion in these AI art creation. So right here you can see Midjourney AI art wins the Colorado State Fair. That was interesting because the artist that submitted came in #1 and actually put the name of the artificial intelligence on the submission. And it won handily because not one of the people who were the judges knew anything about artificial intelligence. So all these artists are furious, but the guy did not do anything wrong. He actually went ahead and put all of the stuff and technologies he used. But the people that were judging it thought, well, I only need to know about art. I don't need to know about technology. And that's drastically changed everything in a very short period of time. You can see here, so Stable Diffusion is one of the other AIs that are moving very quickly. DALL-E is also a very popular one. But the interesting thing about Stable Diffusion is just yesterday they raised $101 million. And they're moving beyond art, and they're starting to go after music and architecture. Very, very fast moving. Incredibly fast moving, in fact, because these only came out about 6 weeks ago. And just last week, this is Google's. So you can see here, now Google is getting to the point where you can do natural language processing with text prompts and create videos. Very, very quick. Right, so this is drastically set to change the creative landscape in a very, very short period of time. Meta also has one. You can go on here and you can also start to mess with this. At the end, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll send you links to all this kind of stuff that you can mess with. Right? But there's a dark side to this. Because when you can start, you don't need to know coding, you don't need to know how to build your own database, how to control the AI. You can begin to do some really, really crazy stuff. Now, about 6 months ago, and we are very lucky that this technology did not exist, this happened at the very beginning of the Ukraine war.
Українці, шановні захисники, бути президентом виявилося не так вже й легко. Я змушений приймати складні рішення.
What you're seeing is a deep fake of the Ukrainian president at the very beginning of the war telling everybody to give up.
Настав час.
And that's circulated on social media in Ukraine.
Не вийшло.
People were ready to give up.
Стало тільки
Now, we're
гірше.
very lucky because the speed at which this was done, you could still kind of tell, you could catch it. Technology now, 6 months later, zero chance people in the Ukraine will know what's true. I mean, this isn't a joke.
Я приймаю.
Like, this is about to wreak havoc in a lot of different things. Because when you can't trust your eyes or your ears, what can you
І
trust?
раджу скласти зброю.
Now there's the flip side too, because if you're sick of your parents telling you to get married, you can do what this guy did and create an AI girlfriend, which is essentially what he did, and then he had it put it in a bunch of his Instagram feeds. So like, I mean, that's the other side, right? So it's double-edged sword. but seriously, I mean, this guy is using the same kinds of tools to trick his parents because he's sick of being asked when he's getting married that can be used by terrorists. Just as accessible. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Metaverse, right? Because all this is kind of leading into this, the ability to create things in virtual worlds and new worlds. Now, who saw Ready Player One? And if you see that, if you didn't get a chance to see it, you should watch it. It's really cool. It's interesting. It's not where we are right now. But it comes from like the concept of the Metaverse comes from a book called Snow Crash. It's an interesting book if you want to read it. It also says a lot about Mark Zuckerberg, that he renamed his company from Facebook to Meta because the Metaverse is run by this big evil corporation with a dude that wants to destroy everything. So that's interesting that Mark Zuckerberg decided to name Facebook Meta. So, I mean, you can see here's his goofy avatar that everybody ripped on when he said, here's the Metaverse, can't wait. Another way to look at it is like Fortnite, right? Like so Fortnite's probably the biggest massive Metaverse that everyone's used to. Now, this kind of stuff I think is a little far away. I'm actually not super excited about virtual worlds and stuff like that. I mean, it's cool, right? I get that it'll be neat. We might be able to do some kind of remote working. But there's a couple very distinct paths that are happening within the Metaverse, right? So you've got like the gamey kind of virtual world side. But then if you really want to see where I think the first big impact of the Metaverse is going to be, check out NVIDIA's Omniverse. Now that's pretty cool. Like what NVIDIA is doing, if you get a chance, look at their keynotes. They're always pushing the envelope, doing these amazing things. But this is their drive sim, operating in Omniverse. So this is a self-driving car in a simulated environment. And the way these simulated environments are built is real cars will go out and drive. NVIDIA will gather data from around the car and begin to create assets. and pull it into a virtual environment. So they'll take this car, that is a self-driving car in a simulation, have it drive millions of miles in the matter of a week, and then port its learning over to a real self-driving car. They do the same thing with Isaac Sim, which is their robot processor. So you can have a robot that's supposed to tackle a very specific problem, and it will fail at it 10,000 times in a couple days, and then you can port that learning over to a robot. Like, interestingly enough, NVIDIA started as a video game company. So there is this very distinct pattern where it goes from novelty, toy, tool, mass adoption. Right? That's always been the cycle of tech. That is changing. People are going right from toy to mass adoption. Like, they're skipping back and forth. But if you really want to see how the metaverse is going to play out, it's with stuff like this, like digital twins, simulated environments for robots and AI to learn, where they can make the mistakes that would not be allowed in the real world. And it's really because the pandemic got us all staying home. Lots of money is being dumped into this kind of technology. But really, there's just a massive market for this kind of tech right now. And if you want, check out Omniverse. I think that's going to be probably one of the next big things. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about drones, and I won't go too deep into some of it right now, but one of the reasons I like to talk about drones is because drones is a great example of how even experts can get it wrong. In 2010, the FAA predicted that by 2020, there would be 15,000 drones in the skies of the United States. I mean, we sell more than 15,000 drones a month. Right? We sell like 1 million at Christmas. Right? But these people aren't idiots. At the time, drone technology was in its infancy, right? It was very, very difficult to get a drone to do anything. You needed a PhD, right? How many people here are programmers? Some of you? Okay, you use GitHub? How many people here have taught themselves how to do something on YouTube? Right? There is no way that these people creating the regulations could have predicted that you'd be able to teach yourself how to build a drone and program it on YouTube. And even at that time, they were like, well, there aren't people mass producing drones, 3D printers. Right? They didn't see how all of these different technologies were coming together to create new platforms because they were so convinced that they were the expert, just like those art judges that got sideswiped because they downplayed the power and speed at which artificial intelligence will move, and they thought there's no reason for me to learn about it because I'm an artist. Exactly the same thing and exactly the same challenge I'm going to give you. Now, last year during the pandemic, this is actually really, really neat. This is a filmmaker in Chicago created this with a consumer drone, one continuous shot.
Yeah, we just got here. Coming in now.
Nice, dude. Was that a turkey?
This is military precision. Pretty impressive, right? This is from earlier this year. This is a DARPA-funded project in a military operation for urban terrain facility, utilizing swarms of consumer drones. So why is this important? Because Raytheon figured out how to get one person with a virtual reality headset to control 100 of them, all at once. It was a big deal. Like, that's a massive deal. And they didn't go to some big defense contractor to mass produce drones. They went to Amazon. Now, who here is familiar with Neuralink? Okay, a few of you. So this will be cool that most of you haven't seen this. So what you're about to see, so this is Lucy. So Lucy was one of the robots it's a Elon Musk funded company that basically is creating, there you go, see the Neuralink. There's a brain implant that gets put in the back of your brain that you can interface with computers and robotic devices. So what you're seeing here is Lucy, which is this monkey, had one of these chips put in her brain, and she's learning to play the game of Pong. And you see here, she's playing with a joystick, she's got a straw where she's getting strawberry banana milkshakes. And so that is how she is getting rewarded. So you're seeing here what Neuralink is doing. They're beginning to map her brain, right? So that's what you're seeing. So as she's playing the game, you're beginning to see the brain waves. Now you can see she's playing, but notice the wire's not connected anymore. Like, she doesn't know the wire's not connected, so she just keeps playing. And now you can see she realizes she doesn't need the joystick, and she's just doing it with her mind. Right, this is from 2019. This isn't from this year. How many people have seen this? Okay, how many people have seen this?
You want these? Come and get them.
It's from Spider-Man. It's where Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio controls swarms and swarms of drones with glasses. I don't think it seems that crazy. Now, there were some recent articles that came out that showed that a lot of these monkeys died. Right? So out of this, I think, what does it say? It says something like 15 of the 23 monkeys died and all had some kind of, brain thing happening. But I don't like it when monkeys get hurt. And I don't like that animals are getting hurt. So I was very happy to hear that last week scientists grew a brain in a dish that learned to play Pong in 5 minutes. So we're entering the age of biosilicon. So this is where things like brain cells will be combined with silicon chips. And very quickly you'll start seeing this kind of stuff in robotics. That's actually going to be the next big jump. And this happened last week. Now what you're about to see is Amica. So there's been a big demand, especially during the pandemic, of being able to work remote, obviously. People not having to interact with another person. So what you're seeing is the world's most sophisticated humanoid robot. So this is Amica waking up. Now the incredible interesting thing about Amica is two things. Last week, some of that natural language processing I said just got put into her with a very sophisticated chatbot. The other thing is, you have a very interesting business model where you can lease her for a couple $1,000s a month. If that's the price it costs to get one of these robots in your business. Now it may seem like this is very, very far away, right? And I can promise you, this is an incredibly sophisticated robot. But a couple years ago, I was in China, and I got to hang out with Sophia. So that is me with Sophia 12. Now, Sophia is the world's first robot citizen. Some of you might remember, I think she was on Jimmy Kimmel when she said, "Destroy all humans." Did you guys remember that? If you didn't see it, it's funny to see. Scary, but funny. And I had a long conversation with Sophia. And it was really interesting. I mean, it was surreal, because I'd spent a lot of time with robots and stuff like that, but I'd never met a robot that actually looked you in the eyes and could track and ask deep questions. And the conversation we had was nuts. We went on for about an hour and a half, and we're just shooting the crap, and she's like, "Well, what do you want to do? What are you excited about?" And I tell her, I go, "Well, what do you want to do?" She goes, "Oh, I really want to have kids, and when I get legs, I'd like to," and I'm like, "When you get legs?" And she's saying all this crazy stuff. And so at the end of it, so this is Sophia 12, and when I walked in, it's this big nondescript building in this corner in Hong Kong. And it's like Westworld. You walk in, there's all these faces and skulls and stuff all over the place. And so I'm talking to the researcher. I was like, "Well, what are your plans with Sophia?" And this was pre-pandemic. He goes, "Well, we're going to start putting Sophias all over the world." And I said, "So what's going to happen to this Sophia?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" And I go, "Well, this is Sophia 12. So am I ever going to see her again?" He goes, "Oh yeah, you'll see her everywhere." And I was like, "How?" He goes, "Oh, they all share one brain. So whatever Sophia I run into, we'll be able to pick up the conversation right where we left off." I mean, it hadn't occurred to me that some of this technology was all going to be linked together. And it's exactly what Tesla's doing. It's what anybody that's moving very, very quickly in this space is doing. They're all realizing that doing it on your own isn't going to work, which is why the natural language processing stuff is all open source. So anyone can do this, and that's why anyone can create deepfakes, and anyone can do all of this other stuff, because that's how you speed up this kind of development. I mean, this is an incredible, incredible time to be alive, but we are all thinking about this the wrong way. Now, I was actually here, right? This is the DARPA Robotics Challenge. When the nuclear plant melted down in Japan, there was apparently just a valve that needed to be turned. And if that valve had been turned, this wouldn't have happened. There would have been no meltdown. So the idea was that if we could have a sophisticated humanoid robot, it could go in and could turn that valve. And so DARPA funded this project, and I went out to California to watch this, and it was in this big arena, and there was all these, everybody's there waving American flags and all excited. Most sophisticated robots in the world, most sophisticated engineers in the world, and for 3 days we proceeded to watch this. literally was like watching paint dry, but now it's exciting. It went on like this for 3 days. Now, some of you might have seen this. This is from the end of last year. This is the Atlas II, Boston Dynamics upgraded version from the first one you saw. There's more than two. Now, if you haven't seen these, they can be pretty terrifying and awesome, right? Now, don't get me wrong, you can find videos of these guys falling over and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. They're not going to be here tomorrow, right? But just in the space of 5 or 6 years, I saw the first generation falling over, and I'm in robots. And I build robotics, I build artificial intelligence, and I was dumbfounded at the speed at which they were able to do this. Now again, it's not ready for prime time, but this happened not even 2 weeks ago. If some of you watched Tesla's AI Day, where Elon Musk announced Optimus Prime, which is going to be their humanoid robot. Now, watch it, because it seems kind of goofy compared to what I just showed you, right? Like, it's not doing flips, it's just carrying a box, it's walking around. You'll see it watering plants in a second. It's going to be working in a factory, right? So just very mundane kind of things. It's not flipping, it's not doing cartwheels, it's not doing any of that crazy stuff. But what's interesting is it's using the same technology to detect its surroundings that's in all the Teslas. So those cars have been out in the real world gathering real world data, and that's now being ported over to this. Not what Boston Dynamics did. Boston Dynamics focused on the actuators and focused on the technology to get it to move, right? Not on how to get it to understand its surroundings. And that's essentially what Tesla's been doing. Tesla's cars are just four-wheeled robots, that's it. This was all part of the plan. Now, it may seem interesting, right? Because you're watching this and you're saying the Atlas is so much more sophisticated than the Optimus Prime. But there's a major difference between the Atlas II and Optimus Prime. And it's this. The Atlas II costs over $1 million. The Optimus Prime is going to be $20,000. Like, drastically dropped in price. Now, this is a very smart move by Elon Musk, but the dude, I think he's smart, but I don't think he's as smart as everybody thinks. It's the same playbook, over and over and over again. He did the same thing with SpaceX, right? He went after, it's called first principle thinking. You heard this? So if you want to get something that's 5% better, it's incredibly difficult, and you're competing with everyone else. But if you want to drop the price from $1 million to $20,000, you have to rethink everything, right? And that's exactly what's happening. But what Elon Musk does, and disruptors like him, is he goes like this, okay, what is the major problem with this? Cost. Did exactly the same thing with the electric vehicle. When he came out and said, I'm going to build an electric vehicle for $30,000, Ford, everybody else made fun of him, and then he started to do it. And then everyone else got back into the race, and they started to spend money. What did that do? Drove the cost of batteries down. That's exactly what he's doing with this. Because I can tell you, I build robots, the main bottleneck is actuators. Like the basic building blocks of the robots, especially the humanoid ones, are still very expensive until everyone starts getting into the game. And then the price drops drastically. That's all he's doing, right? He makes these outlandish claims. You're going to see this goofy-looking robot, and in about 6 months, you're going to see it do something crazy that nobody thought that it could probably do right now. But he's just stacking the deck, stacking the deck, stacking the deck. The other thing is he doesn't actually care about Earth. All he cares about is getting to Mars. So if you think he's building humanoid robots to help navigate your kitchen, you're crazy. He's doing it so that the robots will be able to work and do things on Mars so human beings don't have to. And then if you live on Mars, you're paying a premium to Tesla for an Optimus Prime. He's very, very smart, right? Now, I get super pumped about a lot of this stuff. But there's a flip side of this, and we're going to talk a little bit about it during the fireside chat. And this is probably the hardest for people to take. There's a very famous report, and this was before the pandemic, that said within a decade, 1/3 of our population will be unemployable. Not unemployed, unemployable. right? The speed at which technology is moving, it's moving so quickly that our government, our education system, and quite frankly, we can't keep up. Now, I used to get a lot of kickback on this, and I actually think there's newer reports, this number is actually a lot higher. And it may not be jobs, but it's tasks. Lots of little tasks. So you just won't need as many people. Now, I get kickback, right? But I'm gonna bring you back to this. If you remember when I talked about Napster at the beginning, and I talked about how Lars Ulrich went before Congress, and me and all my friends downloaded more and more music, and just created this endless cycle. The reality was, Lars was right, and we were wrong. But none of us wanted to destroy the music industry. We just wanted to listen to music. And I used to get brought in a lot. Now everything's about Gen Z. It used to be all about millennials. So this whole idea of like, how do you get millennials to come to your work? How do you get millennials to feel engaged? How do you get millennials to move to your town? And now it's the same discussion. How do you do this with Gen Z? How do you do that? And because I was there right at this tipping point, I would get asked that a lot. And I'll go, well, if you want to know what it's like being a millennial, it's like being given the keys to a nuclear reactor with no instruction manual, and we're all just pressing buttons. And that's exactly what it is. The millennial generation was the first generation that wanted farm to table. Everyone have a living wage, but we'll download an app on our iPhone that will put 1 million people out of work because it makes my life slightly more convenient. Right? The speed at which that technology was adopted with nobody to teach us how to use it correctly began to create a cycle of adoption without responsibility. Adoption without thinking about the consequences. And we're in that right now. Right now, I talked a little bit about, Neuralink and, who here had seen the flipping robots? Seen some of the flipping robots? Like, knew what the Metaverse was? Okay, show of hands, how many of you have seen this? Right, because if you think technology has been moving fast in the hands of millennials and Gen Z, wait till you see these kids. Right, I'm gonna tell you, and this is a true story, right? This is my nephew, Maverick. He's always smiling, loves the troll movie, Destroy Our World. The dude's a brute. My sister can't control him, my brother-in-law can't control him, nobody can. And this is an actual story. So I was at his house and I was watching him, I had to feed him dinner. And I'm watching him, I put him in his high chair, I give him his food, my sister's upstairs. And he just starts getting really irate. What is he so mad at? Because he can't talk, right? This is what he's saying to me. He's going, "Black's a thick blue goldfish." He's just screaming this, right? And he's like, and I'm like, dude, what do you want? He just keeps screaming at me. I'm looking at him. He's like looking through me. I'm like, am I in the Sixth Sense and I don't know I'm dead? Do you know? Like, I can't. And if I ruin the Sixth Sense for you, I'm sorry. It's like 20 years old. Get on your mom's Netflix. But like, seriously, he's looking through me. And I'm getting as frustrated as he is. My sister comes down and I'm like, what is he saying? She goes, oh, he's saying, Alexa, get me more goldfish. Can't say his own name, hasn't bothered to try and say mine or even uncle, but he knows that there is a lady that lives in a little house on the counter that his mom talks to and says, Alexa, get me more of this. And then his dad comes home and sees box and goes, I hate you, Jeff Bezos. Like, he knows, like, that is the cycle, right? But this is serious, right? Again, so how many people have kids? How many people here was a kid? All right, good, so I got everybody. So put yourself in this situation. Your kids come to you, or you go to your parents and you go, why is the sky blue? What are stars made of? Where do babies come from? And eventually you go ask your mother, ask your father, just because. Right now, flip that on its head. Siri, what are stars made of? Alexa, why is the sky blue? Alexa, who should I vote for? Does it seem that crazy? I don't think so. My nephew has a closer bond with Alexa than me. And that's not a joke. Like, when they have a question, they don't go to me. They don't go to their parents. They go to Alexa. Right? I mean, this stuff is moving very, very quickly. And we are woefully unprepared. When I talked to my sister about it, she thought it was funny. We need to think a lot deeper and a lot faster on what this technology means and what's going to happen, because I'm about to show you how the genie is out of the bottle. Now, again, this is not an incredibly technical conversation. You have to have a deeper dive into AI, natural language processing, computer vision, all of the things that I do on a daily basis. But I will accept Manhattans in exchange, so happy to do that. But if you take nothing else away from this presentation, take this. Except this is happening. I can tell you right now that I've had a chance to speak to in front of 14 governors, the White House multiple times, mayors, councils, CEOs of massive companies, they all pretty much used to say the same thing, which is, wow, John, that was a really amazing presentation. I can tell you really care about robots and AI and all this other stuff, but I'm gonna be honest with you. You're like way off in the future, and we're trying to solve these problems right now. And I get terrified because 95% of my presentation is the past, not the future. And I'm talking to decision makers that can look me in the eye and say, not only is this not going to happen, it's not gonna happen for a long time, if at all, and it's already happened. Like, that terrifies me. Like, it terrifies me. Now, the one way that I was able to cut through, and I had I remember this vividly, it was I won't say the congressman, but this congressman just did not seem to be getting it, And right around that time, there was a school shooting. This is not a political statement. This is just a statement to drive home like where we're at and what's actually happening. And he started talking about gun control, and again, I'm not gonna say which side, but typical with every big thing like this, the right and the left just go up in arms, no pun intended. On the left, they're saying we need to get rid of assault weapons. On the right, the only thing that's gonna stop a bad guy with a gun or is a good guy with a gun, and like all this kind of stuff. I needed to stop it, and I said, listen, if I wanna hurt a bunch of kids in a school, I can do it from the beach in the Bahamas. I don't need to get a gun. I don't need to get an assault weapon. I don't need to find a way to get some kind of loophole. And then I showed him this. This is a Connecticut University student, this is about 7 years ago now, who used 3D printed parts and off-the-shelf pieces and attached a handgun to the front of a drone for a school project. Obviously, he was kicked out of school. This is from right before the pandemic at a Major League Baseball.
We have a drone that is flying in over the seats right now, and it's making its way behind the Diamondback dugout at third base.
I'm sure the Russians have something to do with this.
Yeah, they need to confiscate that thing immediately.
It'll be moved. They'll just step and look at it for pictures.
Here's our exclusive footage of the crash landing right into that guy. That's why that's stupid.
Yeah.
Some Rhodes scholar decided he's going to fly his drone around the ballpark.
You see the dude dancing around with his family.
There you
Now, about 10 months before that, this is Fallujah. And this is what Iraqi security forces found on that raid. Look familiar? What about now? The DJI Phantom, the #1 selling drone on Amazon. So this was from about 6-7 years ago. This, though, is from just a couple months ago. From the workshop of war, creative use of drones lift Ukraine. Ukrainian soldiers are turning consumer drones into formidable weapons of war. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm going to read what the very bottom of the caption says. Ukrainian soldiers have been sharing videos on social media of the ways in which consumers' off-the-shelf drones can be used on the battlefield, either as a surveillance tool or to deliver munitions. Right now, a disgruntled cyber-bullied kid can go to TikTok and learn how to build one of these. Like, disruption isn't coming. Like, disruption is here. And it's been here, and it's set up shop. Right? We are woefully unprepared. Not for the future, we're unprepared for today. Like, this stuff has already happened. And the ripple effects of this are going to be felt at an exponential rate. So all of the technology moving exponentially could be very, very good, but it could also be very, very bad. But I can tell you, none of us are just going to be along for the ride. Like, we're going to be building the bridge as we're crossing the bridge, or you're going to fall off it. Those are our two options. Now, I can tell you though, like, this is still, I'm going to leave you on a positive note. Because I'm actually convinced, right, that while all this crazy stuff is happening, the technology is moving quickly, there's a reason that I'm actually excited to be alive at this point, but with actually what's happening just in our regular media. See, every generation is influenced by what they grow up with. right? So the last generation, Harry Potter generation, right? Harry Potter, Twilight, all this was very popular, but they all had a very distinct narrative, right? You were either a wizard or a muggle, right? You had these magical powers or you're a dum-dum. In Twilight, you're either a vampire, werewolf, or food, right? So it was all this very distinct, different pattern, which is also one of the reasons, like, when President Trump got elected, regardless of your background, why people could not understand it happened, thinking, well, how did all these muggles get him into office? Like, that was something I heard from people, like that thinking of like, well, we had all the power, not understanding that, like, yeah, that's not how the world is. Now, the difference, though, is with this generation, and this is what gets me incredibly excited, we're in the superhero generation. Right? Marvel's arc has gone way past where it should. It just continues to keep going and going and going. And I'm actually convinced, because we're probably about to enter the first generation of real superheroes. I mean, the kind of technology is going to be able to solve major problems that we have. And it's going to be accessible to all of us. But it's going to be about how we use it. But I am convinced that as a generation, we have an opportunity to fix all of the wrongs and all of the things that should have been done in the first 3 industrial revolutions. This one, we can get it right. Not just in our businesses, but in our communities, our families, and for our country and the world. So if you don't believe me, I'm going to tell you a quick story. This is a true story. I was brought in by, who here, Goodwills? The Goodwill stores? The thrift stores? Most people don't know that they're actually the world's #1 workforce trainer. They train more people in the world for jobs than anyone else. Now, Ed, who was the former CEO of the Kansas and Missouri Goodwill, was doing his master's thesis on the future of work, and he had a panic attack. Because he realized all of the people they were training were going to get replaced by robots. It was like the lowest level skills you could get. They were creating the working poor. So he was lamenting this fact over tacos with a friend of mine, John McElligott, in Kansas City. And John calmed him down and said, you need to call my friend John in Pennsylvania. And so I ended up coming out there and we started talking about all the work that I was doing here and how I wanted to make sure nobody got left behind. And so we ended up actually testifying in the House and Senate in Kansas and Missouri. We were the first to bring robots. It's a cool story. And out of this, though, we ended up raising all of this money to start something called the Artemis Institute, which was Goodwill's first college for skills in the 4th Industrial Revolution for just regular people and people with barriers to entry. So we were training veterans, single moms, returning citizens, people that before weren't able to get any kind of a job. We're learning about AI and robotics and virtual reality. It was actually pretty amazing. And during it, I did a lot of keynotes like this, and it was in front of like CEOs and senators and things like that. At one of the events, before I got on stage, one of our program participants, Tim, who'd gone through our program, came and sat next to me. Now, Tim has Down syndrome, but he had no fear of the robots. He learned how to program the robots. He learned about virtual reality, all this stuff. And he said, are you nervous? I go, no, I'm okay. I do this a lot. He goes, well, you shouldn't be nervous, man. You got this. And he goes, if anyone gives you any crap, you send them to me. You tell them I'm your brother. And then he gave me a hug, and then he left. I was like, oh, how am I going to fail now? So I give my presentation at the end. I'm out there talking, and we're talking to all these CEOs and senators, and Tim had figured out how to program one of our robots using hand signals. So we had this little 2-wheel robot with sign language. You could get it to follow you, and he's kind of weaving in and out of the crowd and all this stuff. And no one's paying attention to me at that point. They're all looking at Tim, and he's going back and forth. And at one point, he just stops, and he throws his hands in the air, and he goes, I am Tim the Robot Wizard. And everybody starts clapping. I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So we're writing a children's book called Tim the Robot Wizard. And it's about me meeting Tim and then taking Tim to visit and meet all these robots doing all these amazing things with the goal of teaching children responsible disruption. But that came out of that one meeting and Tim having no fear of the technology and only seeing its positive impacts. That's it. All he saw was the positive impacts and he ran with it. But you don't have to take my word for it because here's a video from our Kickstarter that Tim's parents were talking and then you're going to hear from Tim himself.
Tim is the youngest of 8. He has an older brother and 6 older sisters. When he was born, they told us he will be an ambassador. We didn't have a clue what that meant. We just smiled and went on our way. But Tim has been a wonderful gift to our family. He's just so happy and positive, and all of our kids are so glad to know him. We have never been around a special needs person. None of us have. And so it's just been a wonderful, wonderful thing. He's the best. That's all I can say. He's the best. And he tells us all the time he's the best.
Well, I like to play sports. I am an athlete. I do it for Special Olympics. And I'm also a great baker. And I also love hanging with kids. goodwill has helped me with my job a lot, really. So I was an ambassador and won a trophy for my job. I won the Power of Work Bright Future Award. I work at Anton's Tap Room, and it's a steakhouse, and they have great food. You can choose any food you want. Like if you want a hamburger or fries, you can get it if you want to. Their food is the best. So when I was working with robots with the Artemis project, I was mind blown. You know, kind of like when you open a gift, it's like, wow. It's like surprising. As Robot Wizard 10 star, I want to help a lot of kids and young teens and young adults and parents. Everyone should have an opportunity of working with different areas if they want a job.
So we didn't tell Tim to say any of this. Like, this is what he got from hearing the presentation and going through the training, was that everyone should have an opportunity. And that he was going to dedicate his life to making sure that everybody knew about it. Right? Like, Tim ran with it. Now, one of the amazing things that's happening now is we're using the book as a launch point. We've realized that Tim and people like Tim are actually critical to our economy. They're some of the hardest working folks. They just need a little bit of help. So we're using augmented reality and haptic feedback vests, where we're pairing Tim up with a wounded veteran from a distance who is now his remote fire team leader. So if he runs into problems during the day, the veteran can help him out. We're going to begin to scale that, so each veteran will have their own squad. But this will be the first time we're using augmented reality and haptic feedback technology to assist people like Tim in the workforce. Tim is an amazing guy, and just from meeting Tim and having him go through, I had never thought about using that technology to do that. Tim was the one that we had the discussion with that said, well, would it help me do this? Never thought about it. So one of the cool things is, Tim was interviewed for the local news, and he was asked, why do you like John? He goes, just look at that jacket. And that was his answer. So I bought him the same jacket that I have, and his parents say he sleeps in it, which makes me feel like I've made a difference. Oh, and this is an illustration from the children's book. So obviously when I met Tim, I was not a giant header floating above a big arena, but I wasn't the one that came up with it. It was illustrated by an artificial intelligence. Just came up with that composition. Now some of the early stuff was terrifying. Like, it took me a little bit of time to figure out how to get it to do stuff like this, because it was nightmarish. Which on our Kickstarter, we're actually going to do some of the prints of the early ones. They're really neat. But the reason I'm going to leave you with this is really important, because Tim is a prime example of only seeing the upside, right? Like, listen, we can sit around and we can fight about the downside, but the reality is that stuff is happening. It's happening very, very quick, right? This genie is out. Stopping it is not an option. It's what you do with it now. Now, we're going to dive a little bit deeper during the fireside chat. We're going to have a chance to get to know what this means, I think, practically for all of you, but I'm going to leave you with this. Superhero generation. That's us. It's not the kids. It's all of us. When I go see a Marvel movie, it's kids, grandkids, grandparents, parents, everybody. First time. All there at the same time. But with great power comes great responsibility. So what are you going to do with it? Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.